him and God full credit for what had happened. Needless to say, the Ben Yehudas were allowed back in their apartment, and Eliezer was able to square his debt with Shalom Belcher. In order to bless the ministry of the Ben Yehudas, God sent water to a desert land. My teachers at school would call this power processing. It's an event where God displays his incredible power in a clear and understandable way to everyone, including the critics. Just to make things absolutely clear, the chance of a rainstorm coming in the few hours that they were sitting out on the street being ridiculed by the crowd was about as likely as fire falling from heaven and consuming the very same crowd. Doesn't happen very often. So how did Eliezer spend his time to bring about this fundamental change in Jewish culture? What did he do to make Hebrew accepted as the language of the Jews instead of the language of angels? How did he convince a group of people who had him beaten, thrown in jail, and ultimately the equivalent of excommunicated from the Jewish congregation? The answer is Eliezer spent his life in culture and education. Seeing the need to revive Hebrew, he started a newspaper, which he would send to anyone who would take it. Newspapers, at his time, were still a new form of communication, and they became the core of his strategy. He published articles on everything, from the weather to religious discussions to the latest town gossip. He also invested in theatrical productions, and he began to write books like Mad. He wrote a dictionary set, which he published in pieces in his newspaper, and ultimately spent the rest of his life writing, and his son I'm blanking on his son's name, but his son continued that after him, worked on it for about 40 years before it was actually finished. Eliezer taught in schools. He was a teacher. He taught the young Hebrew boys and girls, and his only caveat for doing all of this work was that it had to be done in Hebrew. His newspaper was published in Hebrew. His plays were written in Hebrew. He taught the children in Hebrew. He translated Russian, German, French, and English textbooks into Hebrew in order to train up a new generation speaking Hebrew. I think his wife, Deborah, spoke 5 languages, and he spoke about 4 or 5 himself. And they banned all other languages in their house so that their child would grow up being the first child in hundreds of years that only spoke Hebrew. This was a man who was dedicated. And, through his efforts, he convinced people that Hebrew was a language which could be used in everyday life. He basically single-handedly revived the language which had perished to the point that the Masoretes of the 9th century had added vowels to it because they were afraid that people would forget how to pronounce it and ultimately forget it altogether. Through the work of people like Leopold Cohen at the turn of the century, and also people like Neil, people like Dennis, people like the rest of the people at Chosen People, there is a generation of Jewish people who are not adverse to the idea of Messiah. But it's time to convince them that accepting Messiah doesn't mean that they need to stop being Jewish. We need to show them that being Jewish means accepting the Messiah. The Jewish identity revolves around God's plan for mankind. And as we approach the end times, we're beginning to see the Jewish people come together in a way which will bless the whole world, a way that Ezekiel the prophet prophesied in the Valley of Dry Bones. And as believers, we're called to help the Jewish people accept Messiah through the examples of people like Eliezer ben Yehuda, who gave us the path. The Jewish people speak the language of culture, and they have a strong cultural identity. For instance, what do Jewish people do? Jewish people make music. They thrive in the music industry, and they pepper the landscape when it comes to new musical trends, clubs, DJs, all of that kind of stuff. Jewish people dance. Huge phenomenon of Israeli folk dance. And you guys have seen us doing it here, right? Jewish people essentially founded Hollywood, and they continue to thrive there. They make all the feature films. I mean, think Steven Spielberg, big Jewish name. George Lucas, he's Jewish, right? I think so. As Messianic believers, we need to be contributing to these efforts, and we need to infuse them with our Holy Spirit-driven values and the message of God's kingdom. In spite of popular opinion, it is actually possible to be both cool and a believer at the same time. As a Jewish believer, speaking to the Jewish believers in this room, we need to not only embrace our identity as Jewish people, but we should help our non-believing brothers and sisters embrace their Judaism as well. And to the Gentile believers here today, you need to demonstrate a lust for God and his message and a love for the Jewish people. They respect people who stand with them, and they love people who engage with them at a cultural level. I've spoken to dozens of Gentile believers who found their way into Orthodox households who would never let someone like Neil or myself anywhere within 100 miles of their house, because they expressed a love for Jewish culture. They just said, hey, I want to know how you guys live. Actually, the guy that taught Hebrew at the college that I went to before I was at Talbot, that's what he did. He learned Hebrew from an Orthodox family, and then he went and taught it at a seminary. And they knew when they were training him and how to do it. And they didn't care. They were like, whatever. It's cool. You want to learn Hebrew? No problem. We'll teach you. The Jewish people, they aren't threatened by Gentiles like they are by Jewish believers. So as Gentiles, it's a calling to minister to the Jewish people. That doesn't necessarily mean convert them, but it means showing them what it means to be a believer. Much like Eliezer, Ben Yehuda, we need to take advantage of the latest communication methods like the internet and engage our people through dance, music, video, and more. This is where they live, and it's where I'm planning to spend the majority of my ministry over the next few decades. And all this leads up to the vision statement I wrote down when I was planning my ministry. When asked what I see, I wrote down, no longer a remnant. The Messianic movement can't remain a remnant. We have a defeatist attitude oftentimes. We feel like we're the little guy. We're not. We need to become the majority. And in order to do that, we are going to need to target the cultural gene which prevents Jewish people from accepting Messiah. By becoming culture leaders, we'll be able to do that. And through our efforts, the Holy Spirit will move to save the Jewish people in the quickly approaching day of the Lord. Amen. That's all I got for you.
Not too shabby. Eh? I think we'll be hearing more from Dan over the months and years, and I'm looking forward to it. But he's absolutely right. You believe in the sovereignty of God? Do you believe in the sovereignty of God? Yeah. I'm going to tell you that he does things that we never could. Just in terms of organization and structure and planning things. Like the Holy Spirit, because he's everywhere and he's in all believers, can orchestrate things in incredible ways. I had been talking about a return to a focus of Jewish evangelism for about 2 months. What I didn't realize back then, and you can take this for what it's worth and you can believe me or not, it doesn't matter to me, I know what happened. This past week, Jewish evangelism was all we talked about, and how in different groups we can discuss the importance of Jewish evangelism. That was the whole past week. Do you know the name of the class that I'm taking beginning on Monday? Yes. The name of the class is Jewish Evangelism and Follow-Up. You know, once you present the gospel, you need to follow up and continue to contact and continue the relationship. I didn't plan that. And at the time that I started this focus, I didn't know that that was what was being offered. Do you know what our subject is for our Bible study on Saturday afternoons, which will begin again in February, I have to say? Do you know what the theme is? Yeah, go figure. You know the book we're using is Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus by Dr. Michael Brown. Do you know who the keynote speaker is at Simcha this year? Dr. Michael Brown. Isn't that amazing? God is incredible. And he never ceases to blow my mind. It's not unlike the way he's going to blow everybody else's mind when he comes back.